Hi everyone, and welcome to every episode of The Simpsons Season 28 Reviewed. The show keeps chugging along, and so do I with reviewing it. Last season was a drag, and I have not heard good things about this one. But you know what? No. I'm going to try and have a positive mindset going into this, and hopefully there's at least a few episodes which I really like. If you want to stick around to find out, why not also leave a like and subscribe? It certainly gives me the motivation I need to push on and finish this series. Anyway, a quick shout out to the Simpsons wiki as ever. Be sure to check them out in the description for all your Simpsons needs. And with that said, let's move into the season. Season 28, Episode 1. Monty Burns fleeing Circus. When Springfield is burned to the ground, the Simpsons beg Mr. Burns to fund its rebuilding. He agrees under one condition. He gets to put on a variety show at the Springfield Bowl. So my trivia here is that the Springfield Bowl's location and the way it looks is a copy of the Hollywood Bowl. And my best moment was Mr. Burns being knocked back by the lighting. As you can see there, he just couldn't take the impact of that many photons. The season opener gets a 2 out of 5, and it's kind of lucky to be getting a 2 really, given how disappointing this ending was. I mean, let's take a look at this thing. In Act 1, they literally destroy the whole town due to a poorly made lard lad statue, only to move away from that small matter to the much more important matter at hand. Mr. Burns feeling insecure about a play from his childhood? Yeah, that was a bizarre pivot that made very little sense. I mean, obviously, Burns being traumatized by being mocked at a play as a kid is not a particularly good motivation for him on the face of it, but in general I think the show is starting to run into a problem where they can't really rely anymore on flashbacks for a character's motivations in the present. We've already known these characters for so long at this point that it's hard for them to pluck out these new backstories and have us the audience fully buy into them. I know that is not the writer's fault, but it's going to remain true regardless. Not only was the premise disappointing, they also did not stick the landing. The same thing happens again with the town laughing at Burns, and there is no consequence to that. He literally gets over it by saying that he is too old to stay mad anymore. What a way to make not only this episode seem pointless, but to also dilute Burns' character in the process. So yeah, this was a mess, and I was tempted to give it a 1, but I did find a few gags funny which saved it a bit. For example, Mr. Burns clearly telling Lisa to shut up after she says that he never says anything in a clear way. I also liked Smithers taking out and then putting away the hook cane in anticipation of Burns flopping. And as I said, my favourite one was Burns being physically knocked back by the lighting. Season 28, Episode 2, Friends and Family. Mr. Burns hires the Simpsons to play his virtual reality family, but excludes Homer so that he can play Dad. Now lonesome, Homer finds a new best friend, his next door neighbor Julia, who acts just like him. So my trivia for this one is that the Oculus Frink, or Froculus, is a reference to the Oculus Rift. And my best moment was the pilot apparently seeing Homer naked from 10,000 feet. This one gets a 2 out of 5. It feels weird to be starting the season with 2 Mr. Burns focused episodes, but here we go. I think the premise here was more solid than the last one. Burns wanting to use virtual reality technology to experience having a family was an interesting concept that could have led to some real introspection from him. However, it was not executed that way. I mean, Burns being super combative with Marge and Lisa is to be expected, but it never really led into any meaningful character moments, leaving the whole thing feeling a bit hollow. The ending was what really let the plot down for me though. I was actually enjoying Homer spending time with a new female friend of his. However, as soon as Marge finds out about Julia, she has a total freak out. It was just completely out of proportion, and made Marge look like a paranoid so-and-so. Sure, they kind of make up at the end, but Marge still has to insist that she was not in the wrong for getting mad. I mean, sorry Marge, but you were the one in the wrong here. Like last episode though, there were a few decent gags here. The one about Julia's pilot boyfriend also seeing Homer naked from his plane was one, and I also enjoyed Homer making a mess of the house, while he was the only one there. Season 28, Episode 3, The Town. After Homer catches Bart rooting for Springfield's football rival, the Boston Americans, he plans a family vacation to Boston in an attempt to show Bart that Boston is a terrible city. So my trivia for this one is that after the 2017 Super Bowl, a rerun of this episode aired. With a small Easter egg, the score was changed to 38-28, the actual Super Bowl score that year. And my best moment was Homer being unable to put the Boston hat on. This one is a 4 out of 5. Unlike the first two episodes of the season, this one actually has a solid story to go along with a few decent jokes. Sure, on paper it is another travel episode, but they did a good job of showing a fresh take on it. Homer getting worked up over a place like Boston because of their sports team is absolutely something he would do. So it was very natural for them to take the aptly named Hatecation there. That has slight City of New York versus Homer Simpson vibes. Unlike that episode, this was not all hating on Boston though, as Homer actually came around to the place. So much so that he and Marge agreed to move the family there. Despite Lisa loving it though, Bart didn't, and set up a scenario which would surely end their time in the city. I love that ending, by the way, of Homer being unable to put on the hat. It not only calls back to his hatred of the hat from earlier in the episode, it's also just nice to see him stand by his principles. I know they had to move back to Springfield by the end, but unlike most of the times they do this actually felt a bit more believable, rather than a straight jump back to the status quo. As well as a few good jokes about Boston, there was also some nice fluid animation here, especially when Bart was showing off the hat to Homer, and Homer was freaking out about it. So yeah, overall this was a solid episode in all departments. Despite never hitting amazing highs, there was also no real flaws here. Season 28, Episode 4, Treehouse of Horror 27. The 3 short stories this year are Dry Hard, BFF RIP, and Mofinger. So this is the 600th episode of the show, and my best moment was the scene of Bart killing everyone. Quite gruesome, I know, but I thought it worked quite well. So this year's Treehouse of Horror special gets a 3 out of 5. So yes, the 600th episode of the show is indeed a Treehouse of Horror. Does it live up to that hype? No, not really, but it was okay, and significantly better than last year's. The intro with Sideshow Bob and Frank Grimes was okay, I guess, but the first part was not. Burns staying away from all the action, hogging the water, was not particularly exciting, and the segment ended in a weird way too. The second part though was my favourite. Lisa having this rogue, jealous, imaginary friend makes a degree of sense, and it flows quite well. I also liked Chief Wiggum saying, "The only invisible killer I believe in is God." The final part was also solid enough. I enjoyed Homer as a bad guy. His evil voice was nice, I thought. And as I said, the newly trained Bart showing off the art of killing in some over-the-top gruesome ways actually worked for me. Maybe it's just because the kill count of this episode is so insanely high that I have to respect it. I just found this to be an okay episode without having anything much to shout about. Season 28, Episode 5, Trust but Clarify. Lisa and Bart investigate Krusty's suspicious new candy. Meanwhile, Homer wants a promotion at the plant and asks Marge to help him look the part. My trivia for this one is that the song This Town by Frank Sinatra plays when Homer and Marge walk inside the Springfield Mall, and my best moment was Mr. Burns kicking Homer's new suit. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. Harry Shearer may have been the writer here, but the feel of this episode did not differ much from what the show always is at this point. I mean, this did have 3 storylines running at the same time: Bart and Lisa investigating Krusty's new snack, Homer trying to find the ambition to better himself, and the one about Kent getting fired after being proven to be a serial liar. I would not have had 3 storylines on the go personally. They did connect them in the end, in fairness, but still, it's just really hard for there to be any flow to a story when you have to keep chopping and changing between them. Also, Kent's story did not feel original to me at all. Indeed, the similarity to "you can't always say what you want" couldn't be ignored. There was also no real satire here, in either the Kent or Krusty plot, and the opportunity was there in both. Instead, all we got was the same old throwaway remark about how the media lie, or how Krusty is shady with his products. There were a few okay jokes, but no more than that. Bart had a few nice lines, either mocking Lisa or tricking Otto. And I also liked how after Burns left his footprint on Homer, he invited Smithers to do the same. Only it was an invitation for Smithers to also get kicked, not for Smithers to kick Homer. It was an invitation he gladly accepted regardless. Season 28, Episode 6. There Will Be Buds. Homer gets roped into coaching the kids' lacrosse team with Kirk Van Houten. However, when Kirk gets too clingy, Homer starts to regret taking the role. So, despite what Kirk says in this episode, lacrosse doesn't actually have the second highest concussion rate after football. It's actually behind a lot of other sports in that regard, and my best moment was Homer and Kirk's song. This one gets a 4 out of 5. Matt Stallman comes to the party again here with another solid episode. This was a very straightforward story, but it was well told and actually ended in a feel-good way. Kirk is always a nice character to focus on in my opinion. He always tends to bring out big reactions in the other characters. Usually negative reactions, sure, but reactions nonetheless. Here, it is Homer who has to put up with him and pretend to be his friend. Kirk is a bit obnoxious here, so because of that, it is easy to see why Homer wants to spend as little time with him as possible. Homer does it for the sake of his kids though. That is until Kirk finds out the truth through song. Well, at least Homer didn't lie through song like Apu. Seriously though, that song was quite well done, and the ending of it got a genuine laugh out of me. It is presented as a split screen, then, in a way which makes no sense at all, they are revealed to be right next to each other. That was a great moment. The only thing here which falls a bit flat for me was the whole strippers angle. It's kind of dumb how they all feel the need to help to get Kirk back on time, and the helicopter came right out of nowhere. That is rescued somewhat by the ending of the kids winning their lacrosse game and having some celebratory pizza though. This episode is also funnier than the average one from this era. I like the gag about Kirk's hair in a flashback, as well as seeing Marge actually slap Helen. This was on the high end of a 4 for me, easily. The strip club scenes are the only thing which stop it from being a 5. Season 28, Episode 7, Havana Wild Weekend. When the retirement castle and the hospital can't solve Grandpa's health issues, the Simpsons decide to take a family trip to Cuba to get him cheap medical care. So my trivia for this one is that The Vulture's Nest is a parody of the show Shark Tank, and my best moment was the Vulture's Nest show. This one gets a 1 out of 5. This was bad, but it was not bad in an exciting way, where I have a lot to get off my chest. Instead, it was one of those drab, boring affairs, which I don't have a lot to say about. A Grandpa and Homer story on autopilot, where they had a fallout and make up in the end, after Grandpa's mad adventure fails. None of the characters Abe meets are interesting, and the jokes are some of the most unfunny and dragged out in a while. The vacation side of things also fell flat. I guess the novelty of seeing Mr. Burns on a Shark Tank, or Dragon's Den as it's called in the UK, type of show was decent. But that is about all the praise I can muster for this one. Season 28, Episode 8, Dad Behavior. Homer finds a new app that outsources his father-son bonding. However, it works too well, and Bart becomes attached to his new father figure. So Homer befriends Milhouse to get back at him. My trivia for this one is that the chalkboard gag, "I will watch all 600 episodes without sleeping," is a reference to a marathon that was being aired to celebrate the 600 episode mark. And my best moment here was the hostage negotiator having a debate with Marge. This one gets a 2 out of 5. The main plot here was basically a worse version of Brother from the Same Planet. It only got moderately interesting near the end, when Kirk and Bart went up against Homer and Milhouse. The actual conflict did not feel that earned. We all know Homer and Bart have their problems by now, so an episode will have to go that extra mile to get me to buy into a character story between those two. Instead of doing that though, the episode was filled up with filler scenes, like all of the ones with the pointless guest star and the entirety of Abe's subplot. Like seriously, that was stupid and boring, quite the combination. As I said though, it was interesting to see Milhouse and Bart essentially swap dads, as they are such odd combinations, but other than that race at the end, they never really did much with it. The jokes were again poor for the most part, but the hostage negotiator pacifying Marge for Homer worked quite well I thought. Season 28, Episode 9, The Last Traction Hero. An accident places Homer in a cast, and in a position to sue Mr. Burns. This leaves Marge unfulfilled, so she starts spending time with Smithers. Meanwhile, Lisa is proclaimed bus monitor and tries to keep the peace. My trivia here is that Bart throwing a sledgehammer at a screen showing Lisa's face is a reference to the commercial 1984, aired during Super Bowl 18, and my best moment was the never-ending trapdoor. This one gets a 2 out of 5 again. While not the worst thing you've ever seen, this was still incredibly mediocre. The main plot of Homer suing Burns had Bart gets hit by a car vibes, so once again the originality was lacking. The idea of having Marge and Smithers bond was actually decent. Their personalities do complement each other quite well. You can see glimpses of that in the scenes they had together. However, those scenes are too limited. They were never truly able to expand on their relationship, because so much time was taken up with Homer sitting around, or Lisa's subplot. On that subplot, I did not like it. Lisa wanting to have control over people is nothing new, but she was just unlikable with it here. At least the kids turned on her in the end. Back to how the episode finished now. It was goofy nonsense, with both Homer and Marge getting injured. There was no real resolution to the story, as Marge still had the same problem of not being listened to. The episode was not very funny either, although the gag about the Mr. Burns trapdoor being renovated so it went on forever was decent. Season 28, Episode 10, The Nightmare After Krustmas. Krusty tries to impress his daughter as they spend Christmas with the Simpsons. Meanwhile, Reverend Lovejoy seeks converts after poor church attendance, and Maggie is scared by a spooky Christmas toy. My information about this one is that Krusty's Dream is a parody of Frozen, and my best moment was the Christian version of Itchy and Scratchy. This one was a 3 out of 5, and it was about the most obvious rating I could ever give an episode. Liz did the basics well, and never did anything particularly bad. It also managed to capture the Christmas spirit very well, with some of the locations and all of the snow throughout the episode. Also, boy did this episode like the song Carol of the Bells. It is played in various forms about half a dozen times. In terms of what was actually going on, there was technically 3 stories. The 2 main ones which interlink with each other, and Maggie's little doll one. Krusty's time with his daughter was okay, although because of all the other things going on, the conflict was a little rushed, and it was obvious that they would make up in the end. I do at least like how they foreshadowed Krusty converting to Christianity by mentioning that Sophie was raised Christian. This did succeed in giving Reverend Lovejoy something to accomplish, to restore his reputation, and despite the fact that Krusty converted back in the end, Lovejoy still somehow managed to get more people coming to the church. Maggie's little story was okay. After Homer and Marge not noticing her disapproval, it was nice to see her take matters into her own hands and destroy the creepy doll. So yeah, a solid episode that never reached great heights or was that funny, but what it did have were easy to follow story beats that made some degree of sense. Season 28, Episode 11, Pork and Burns. Marge orders Homer to find a new home for Plopper, but he is unable to let him go. Marge also has to try and help Lisa, who has fallen out of love with her saxophone. My trivia for this one is that Bart says that Lisa has an autograph of the actor Dean Cain. Don't know why she would have that, but there you go. And my best moment was Homer reuniting with Plopper. This episode gets a 3 out of 5. I would not call this a solid episode, as there were a few oddities with both the plots, but there was still enough here to make this moderately enjoyable. For example, the Plopper story started on shaky ground. The episode just casually drops the bombshell that Homer has been taking care of him all his time. Like, that was not shown or even hinted at before, but okay. Once you get past that though, there were some nice moments of him and a pig together. The whole emotional support animal thing was quite funny, and to be honest, Homer is probably no less genuine than most people who jumped on that trend in real life. I swear there was a story of someone actually having an emotional support pig. Didn't it get kicked off a flight or something like that? Anyway, that musing aside, I did enjoy the ending of them running together after Smithers frees Plopper from Burns. The Lisa subplot was a bit meh in my opinion, mainly because losing interest in her saxophone and getting rid of it felt so abrupt. So it came off as a contrived, forced conflict, instead of a organic, character-motivated one. The jokes here were a mixed bag. Some were not great. I mean, I literally called the one where Lenny called Plopper Homer after eating a bag of chips out loud before it was even said. The punchline to that setup could not have been more obvious. I could have also done without Lisa and Homer having anxiety attacks. On the flip side, I did enjoy Dr. Nick's cameo, and Lisa and Bart quite literally putting their heads together. Season 28, Episodes 12 and 13, The Great Phatsby. Mr. Burns crosses paths with a rap music mogul. After getting conned by him and reduced to bankruptcy, Burns seeks revenge. My trivia for this one is that the name of the episode pays homage to the 1925 novel The Great Gatsby, and indeed the 1974 film of the same name. And my best moment here was the rap songs. This one gets a 2 out of 5. So it is very interesting that over 20 seasons after the last, we get another Simpsons two-parter episode. However, unlike Who Shot Mr. Burns, this aired as a standalone episode, and is structured like a single 40-minute episode. It is ironic that this episode also had the focus of Burns. We sure are getting a lot of him this season, aren't we? Because there was no break between the two parts of the episode, there was no real suspense built in the story. After all, we all knew that Burns would get his wealth back in the end. Since that was so obvious, the only thing the episode could do was try and make the journey entertaining. It didn't really manage that. For a start, you could tell that they were really stretching this till a 40-minute runtime. The Marge and Lisa subplot of getting a store was completely pointless, and the Smithers one in Canada could have had less scenes than it did. As far as the main plot goes, it had the odd okay moment, but in the end it was disappointing. Burns and this rich rapper never had that much chemistry together, and to be honest at this point, I'm just a bit jaded on The Simpsons meeting rich billionaires. It's happening like once a season at the minute, which is way too much to take seriously. I did at least like how Homer stuck by Burns in the episode. They were surprisingly good together here, and it kind of made you want to root for them in their quest to get revenge. I also like the ending revelation, that the only reason JG betrayed Burns was because Burns himself said to in his book. That fits Burns' character well, of course he would say that, and the book was foreshadowed earlier on. The episode was a little light on jokes overall, due to the sluggish pacing in general. But as I said, some of the rap lyrics were good, and Homer's interactions with the goose were also nice. I think we got a few too many guest stars here though, and they were not particularly well handled. Overall, as I said, this episode had its moments, but when you make a 42-minute episode, it needs to have more than the odd nice moment. It needs to be consistently engaging, and this simply wasn't. And by the way, in case you were curious, I will be counting this as episodes 12 and 13. That means that both of these episodes count as a 2, just like they normally would. I wish I could just count this as 1, 2, but technically this is 2 separate episodes. So the show kind of tied my hands on that one. Season 28, Episode 14, Fatzcarraldo. Homer finds a small hot dog restaurant and digs up some childhood memories along the way. My trivia for this one is that when Homer imagined his family as food, he imagined Bart as a Butterfinger bar. And this is of course a reference to how Bart used to star in Butterfinger commercials. And my best moment was the ending. This one gets a 3 out of 5. While this won't go down as a memorable episode, it was one which had some nice Homer moments, and the odd good joke. Homer being so desperate to get out of Patty and Selma's show at the start was nice, and his drive away from there ended up with him discovering this hot dog shack. Homer and the owner got along quite well, and the flashback showing that Homer went there as a boy, while Abe and Mona had marriage counseling, was a good one. That is a kind of simple backstory I can accept from a character at this point in the show. Nothing massive which was somehow never mentioned before, just a nice bit of info about what he did as a kid. It also still has relevance to this day, as it explains why he is so addicted to food. The whole chase scene was a bit OTT, and probably could have been done away with. Same could be said with the subplot. It wasn't a necessity here, and if anything ended up taking something away from the main plot. The ending, however, does somewhat redeem this. It was a nice way to end, to have the guy finally remember Homer. You could tell that it really meant a lot to Homer, almost like it completed a piece of his childhood. Some of the jokes here I enjoyed, were Homer saying a menu would be nice, after it looked like he was praying. The clown car with all the lawyers was also a clever visual gag. Season 28, Episode 15, The Cad and the Hat. When Bart betrays Lisa, he has to deal with his guilt, literally. Meanwhile, Homer is revealed to be good at chess. So the name of this episode is of course a reference to the children's book The Cat in the Hat by Dr. Seuss. And my best moment was Mayor Quimby saying they just lowered the standards instead of actually cleaning up the sea. This one gets a 1 out of 5. Well, I usually praise the writers for trying new things, and having Bart's guilt manifest as this physical monster seen throughout the episode was certainly different. It just didn't do anything for me though. The main problem was that it was hard to believe that Bart felt that much guilt. I mean, all he did was throw away a damn hat. A hat which was never shown off enough to make it believable that Lisa had such a connection to it. Because of this, Lisa saying that she hopes Bart's guilt kept growing felt overly mean, to be honest, and even though she kind of forgave him in the end, she was still even a bit funny about that. So yeah, all the emotion attempted here came across as phony and manipulated, instead of anything you would genuinely care about. Also, the big ending message here was that Bart has a conscience. I mean, I think we already knew that by this point, but fair enough. Homer's chess subplot was better, but only marginally. It takes some believing that he can master the game, but it did lead to a few decent scenes with Abe at least. Magnus Carlsen's guest appearance, though, was rather flat. Even if they poked fun at how flat it was still flat, not an enjoyable episode at all. Season 28, Episode 16, Kamp Krustier. When Bart and Lisa return home after a traumatic incident at Kamp Krustier, they put an end to Homer and Marge's romantic moments. My trivia here is that Chief Wiggum and Lou approaching the treehouse, making loud stomping noises and causing the drinks to shake, is a reference to Jurassic Park, and my best moment was Charlie's response to Lisa. So was this as traumatic for me as Kamp Krustier was for Bart and Lisa? Sadly, yes it was. It's back to back 1 out of 5s. This episode had no reason to exist, really. I'm not a massive fan of retelling the Kamp Krustier story again, especially setting it right after the kids came back. This didn't even work as some kind of cheap nostalgia for season 4, because not many of the original themes from that episode are carried into this one. It didn't even have any of the bullies make an appearance. The whole idea of the kids being traumatized was promising, but it was just handled in a shoddy manner. Bart and Lisa thinking they saw a kid drown was never even hinted at in the original episode, and because of that it was hard to truly get behind. Also, the ending reveal we got here was lame. Of course, no kid actually died there. In fact, he wasn't even a kid at all. The only good moment to come from it was Charlie saying that he didn't actually like to be called a little person, as Lisa suggested. It is very much Lisa, isn't it, to just decide what a group of people want to be called for them. As underwhelming as the main story was, though, the Homer and Marge side of things was even worse. It made no sense how Homer suddenly became smart, and it was equally as dumb that he decided to completely change his personality and give up on sex. This was also a boring episode, as there were hardly any jokes on offer. Season 28, Episode 17, 22-430. Bart becomes a star basketball player at Springfield Elementary. However, the success soon gets to his head. So the name and plot of this episode are a reference to the ESPN documentary series 30-430. And my best moment was the Johnny Tightlips appearance. This one gets a 3 out of 5. This was indeed a parody of a sports documentary, and as ever when a show changes its format, it lives and dies by its execution. This was hit and miss. Parts of it I liked, but parts of the presentation confused me. For example, they kept cutting away from the main action a bit too often in my opinion, often to something that was completely unrelated to what Bart was doing. I also did not like the running gag with Nelson's dad. They are really beating that joke into the ground lately. As I said though, there were some positives here to balance this out to a 3. I liked how Bart got good at basketball by throwing paper into the bin in detention. This works because it's not like he had an unbelievable level of talent or anything. I mean, according to Marge, he found out that he was not that good as soon as he played against someone tall. The Bart and Homer conflict was not at all original and felt a bit bland, but at least the mob added a bit of spice with their fixing of the games. Some decent jokes here include seeing Johnny Tightlips again. He is usually fun whenever he is on screen. Krustier's Dolly Parton reference, and Louie's brutal put down to Lisa about her not being a real journalist also qualify. Season 28, Episode 18, A Father's Watch. Worried that Bart is destined for failure, Marge takes expert advice to give out a trophy for everything. Meanwhile, Bart gets some encouragement from Grandpa, who gives him a precious watch. The title of this is a parody of the drama film A Father's Will, and my best moment here was the ending. This one gets a 3 out of 5. I can imagine some people enjoying this episode a bit more than me, as the story was very character focused, and has a sweet ending to leave a good impression. A lot of the episode to me though was on the boring side, and even though the Homer, Bart and Abe scenes were solid enough, they were still incredibly predictable. Bart overhearing Homer bad-mouthing him, only for him to get motivation from Grandpa in the form of a new pocket watch, only for him to then lose that pocket watch at a crucial time. It was all very cliche, but the ending where Homer resists the urge to be a jerk and gives Bart back his watch was good. It was also sweet to see Abe and Bart have so much fun at the photo shoot. There was also a bit of satire here about parenting, and how a lot of the advice books from experts in that field are a total scam. I really don't get why people fall for trends like this in real life. I mean, you're never going to get one perfect way which works for every kid. Just like adults, every child is going to be different, so it's the parents' job to know their child well enough to raise them in a way which works for them. Marge should be smart enough to know this, I feel. But here, she got suckered in like everyone else. As far as the jokes, as I said, not many were to my taste, but I did like the callback to Milhouse being hit by the rocks. Season 28, Episode 19, Le Caper Chase. Mr. Burns goes to Yale and discovers, much to his dismay, that it is all politically correct. So he starts his own college, Burns University, and Homer is hired as a professor. So my trivia for this one is that Homer traveling to the resort and teaching robots is a reference to the 2015 film Ex Machina. And my favourite moment here was the softball game at the start. This one is a 2 out of 5. This only existed for two reasons really. To poke fun at both the modern PC woke culture of colleges and of course Trump University. It does succeed at that to some extent, but both of those are such easy targets that it's kind of impossible not to. It was mostly unoriginal stuff, like just having the millennial college students say buzzwords like microaggression and cisgender, etc. There was no punchline to this though. It's like the show thought that just saying those words would be enough of a joke by itself. Now, I am not a massive fan of modern South Park either, but they did tackle the whole SJW issue much better than this. The ending was also a mess, with Homer being taken to this secret place with a bunch of famous people. I hardly even followed that bit, to be honest. My interest had long left me by then. There were a few okay scenes here which stopped this from being a 1, like the softball game in the beginning, and Homer teaching the classes. Still a mediocre effort though. Season 28, Episode 20. Looking for Mr. Goodbart. Bart gets in trouble at school and is forced to look after Skinner's mother as punishment. After spending time with various grandmas in the neighborhood, he learns the benefits of hanging out with the elderly. So the title of this episode is a reference to the novel and movie, Looking for Mr. Goodbar. And the best thing in the episode for me was Bart's costumes for all the different elderly people. This one gets a 4 out of 5. Yeah, this was mostly enjoyable. Skinner getting Bart to take care of Agnes seems like a rare plot point that is actually overdue by this point. They have some fun together teasing Martin and his grandma, before Bart gets the idea to loan himself out as a grandchild for all the lonely old people. That does make sense for his character, but it's not like it's all bad. He is pretty upfront and honest that he's just grifting, but at the same time he does actually seem to be respectful to the old people, and they seem to have a good time with him, so all is well, I guess. The finale tried to be a bit more serious, when Bart finds out that one of the women he's spending time with wanted to kill herself. It works narratively, given that it gives Bart something deeper to think about, rather than just getting their gifts, but it doesn't end up coming to much after they find Phoebe, so I can't call it great or anything. The subplot was of course stated, even by the time this episode aired, but I guess the show had to reference Pokemon Go at least once. It was alright for what it was. Of course Homer would get hooked by the microtransactions in a game, like why would he do anything else? And the weird anime style song with Homer and Lisa was decent, if only for the animation it showed off. The subplot was not great, don't get me wrong, but they at least put the effort in to tie it into the main plot. This episode was not full of laughs or anything, so this is definitely a low 4, but I did like Ned and Apu finding lookalikes of each other's god. Season 28, Episode 21, Moho House. Homer and Marge attempt to work on their marriage, not realizing that someone is trying to break them up. My trivia for this one is that the Gracie Films logo appears at the end of Homer's flip book. This is the second time it appears in an episode. The first was in You Can't Always Say What You Want, and my best moment was Ned and his boys' religious version of Take Me Out to the Ball Game. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. Another marriage problems episode here that only had one twist, and that was that someone else was trying to break Homer and Marge up because of a bet. That was a twist which had potential to be fair, but it never involved the rich guy and his bet with Burns enough in the story to get it to work. Instead we got some Moe and Marge scenes, which were never going to go anywhere, and only served to set up the ending, where Homer and Marge make up in an unconvincing way. I mean, the way this episode is presented, Marge should probably leave Homer just for the sake of her own health. The scene where she is up all night crying in bed is pretty dark, especially when she said that that was the usual thing. It's really not a good look for the show as a whole, when the most important relationship on it is portrayed in such a bad light. Mercifully for this episode, there were a few nice things here which save it from a 1. Smithers was alright here. I liked how annoyed he got at Burns wagering him, and how he got the guy out of paying in the end. And as I said, the Flanders song I quite enjoyed. It may have been a pain to Homer, but the new lyrics Ned made up were actually decent. Season 28, Episode 22, Dogtown. After a jury decides that a dog's life is more important than that of a human, the status of dogs rises in Springfield. When the dogs recognize their position of power, they assert dominance over the humans. My trivia for this one is that when Lisa and Bart are cornered by a crowd of dogs, Poochie can be seen in the group, swinging some nunchucks. And the best thing here for me was Groundskeeper Willie acting like a wild dog. The season finale gets a 3 out of 5. This was an interesting experiment really. Not at all the type of thing this show usually does outside of maybe a Treehouse of Horror segment. The first half with Gil getting hit by Homer's car and the whole court case that came from it was fine. It was very much like a standard episode. The whole premise of the town preferring the dog's life over Gil's was also somewhat realistic. I'm not sure it would happen in court, but there are plenty of people I'm sure who would value a dog's life that highly. Maybe more than certain human beings, and I'm certainly not judging anyone, whatever their opinion on that is. The second half of the episode, where the dogs take over and start terrorizing the town, was a bit undercooked. For example, why did they spend so much time on Santa's little helper, when he was hardly a factor in the ending? Gil also kind of got the short end of the stick, given that Marge was the one who saved the day, but I guess we should expect that for him. I also don't think that domesticated dogs could become this antagonistic to their owners so quickly. That seems like something that would take generations to develop, but if any dog experts out there want to correct me, then be my guest. There were a few nice moments here, like the intro leading into the actual episode, and Groundskeeper Willie blending right in with the feral dogs. Quality-wise, this was an average end to the season, but given the unique premise, this will definitely stick in my memory more than most from this era. So, that is all 22 episodes from Season 28 done. And here is a season summary. We have a new low so far in terms of the average score. It got a 2.45. My bottom 5 episodes were as follows. The Caper Chase at 5, Monty Burns Fleeing Circus at 4, The Cad and the Hat at 3, Havana Wild Weekend at 2, and I decided that Kamp Krustier was the worst of the year. But there's not much in the 3 1 out of 5 episodes really. As far as my top 5 go, we have to make it up with 2 3 out of 5 sadly, those being 22 for 30 at 5, and A Father's Watch at 4. The 3 4 rated episodes were Looking for Mr. Goodbart at 3, The Town at 2, and There Will Be Buds as the best. So, this season, yeah, this one drained me, more than any other up to this point. Not only because I didn't like it, but more so because it felt more unoriginal than ever before. Like half the plotlines here were just some form of variation on ones we'd seen before. I get that it must be tough to be fully original at this point in the show, but there was hardly any funny moments or jokes to make up for it. That's the thing. At least the worst episodes here were not some of the worst of the show, I guess. They were mostly just boring rather than horrifically bad. But by that same token, I don't think there was a single great episode here. Just a few good ones. I really would not advise you to go to the trouble of watching this season, unless you are a massive Simpsons fan, who just needs to see all the episodes. I'm not sure I even want to delve much into the themes of this season. In fairness, it's not like there was much depth to be found anyway. The obvious thing though, which I'm sure everyone noticed, was that this season was packed full of Mr. Burns. He played a big part in at least half a dozen episodes here. In fact, this might be the most Burns-heavy season ever. Some of the early seasons might rival it in that regard, but that's about it. Sadly, the inclusion of him so much was not a good thing. Burns mirrors the show at this point. He is a watered-down shadow of his former self, who struggles to even find a reason or motivation to do what he does. So that's about all for this one, guys. I'm sorry this was such a negative review, but all my positive energy from the start of the video was just squeezed out of me over the course of 22 mediocre episodes. I'm just not at all enjoying watching this show at the minute. I will soldier on, of course, because I'm very close to being caught up, but the sooner I am caught up, the better, at this point. In spite of my moaning, I do hope that you all got something out of this video. I'm trying my best, so if you could all like and subscribe, I would very much appreciate it at this point. In the next few months, I will be releasing a few different types of videos to give me something else to work on. But rest assured, I will continue to have these videos out on probably a monthly basis. That's about all. Take care, guys.